And this is the second in our two-part series with Focus Training and Fusion Recruiters. And what I loved about the first session, we have some people here that were in that session as well, is that the best part of the day also came from sharing ideas with one another. So these ladies are going to do a wonderful job of setting the stage for us. And we're going to ask them some questions specifically about the topic of recruiting, employee development, onboarding, and how they're doing that. But then we'll move to breakout. So for our virtual folks, you all be in virtual breakout teams together. In-person folks, you're well organized at tables right now for teams. If you're sitting at a table with people from your own organization, during that time, I would encourage you to branch out and meet somebody new from another organization. It'll be a good time for us to just all collectively in this room share ideas and best practices. So we commit to start on time and to end on time, but to enjoy this time that we're here together. I'm going to turn it over to Amanda from the Fusion team. I will tell you, she has put the lion's share of the work into making this program happen over many months of preparation. So let's give her a round of applause, Amanda.
Can I come up here?
Yes, that's great.
Good to see you. Sounds good. Well, I'm not as good as Melissa, so no, I'm just kidding. I have my notes. I want to make sure to kind of thank everybody for coming today and taking time out of your schedules to be here in person and also virtually. And obviously for our panelists, I'm sorry. But also wanted to say thanks to Charter Manufacturing for hosting and using the space today. So thank you so much. But I just wanted to give background. I'm Amanda Mast, if you don't know me from Fusion Recruiters. And our team obviously is collaborating with the Focus Training team for this event. And we really decided through conversations, trends that we're hearing in the market, that it's great to have kind of the hiring side, but also the employee development side, and creating events and topics that we're hearing, that best practices, ideas sharing, that we can come together and learn from panelists, but also each other at the roundtable discussion. So that's definitely part of the reason we created this. Is our second one. And so we're excited here today, and I'll let Melissa kind of take it from here, and we can answer some questions from the audience too as we go. If you have questions at the end of the panel group, we can either take them virtually or in person as well. So thanks for coming again.
Thanks, Amanda. We're going to turn it over now to our panelists, and I'm so excited because we have people here representing different organizations and different industries, and going to share with us a little bit about some of their perspectives on the idea of retention, engagement, culture, and transition of staff in their organizations. So I'll start at the top with Angie, and then we'll come down the line to all three ladies. If you don't mind, just first to introduce yourself to the group, share your role, and if you want to share a little bit about your career journey, kind of how you got to where you are today, we would love that too. I'll have Angie from Charter start us off.
Yeah, hi, I'm Angie Ziegler. I'm titled Vice President of Talent Management here at Charter Manufacturing. I've been in my role here almost 3 years. It'll be January in 3 years. So have responsibility for talent acquisition, which we have a great leader in the room who leads that function. And then we also have I have responsibility for learning and development, as well as all of the talent management processes across the organization. So getting here, and I'll talk a little bit about Charter in a second, but getting here in terms of my role, I started out in learning and development early in my career and never left. I've always stayed in this lane of learning and development, talent management, coaching, and planning all those talent processes, because it's really, excuse me, my passion. And I've always wanted to stay in the development space. When I started out at Harley-Davidson, not too far out of my college career, I'll say, because I was there for 18 years, so I was really young when I started. And when through my career at Harley, spent a lot of time in that space and left there leading, we called Harley-Davidson University on the employee side. And then went into Oshkosh Corporation and was responsible for all the same things that I'm responsible for here. And a great organization, did a ton of work around culture and trying to change the culture due to the switch of a CEO that we had in place. Left there and came to Charter, and again, another organization very focused on culture and people first and all the great things that I love about this work in terms of impacting people in such a positive way. And so Charter, obviously doing the work that I'm doing here. So Charter is a 2,200 employee organization. We have multiple business units that make up Charter Manufacturing. So Charter Manufacturing is the enterprise. And then we have basically 3 different segments that we call business units. One of them is Charter Steel. It's our largest facility. It's probably about 80% of our organization, which is in Saltville in Ohio. And then we also have Charter Wire, which has 2 locations, one down in the Menominee Valley and one at 81st Street in Milwaukee. And then we also have Charter Aerocast, which is in Shawano, Wisconsin, and Charter Durabar, which are part of our iron business down in Illinois. So that makes up our organization. This is our corporate headquarters. So welcome. Thank you all for coming today. And we're on a journey of really driving a people-first culture throughout the organization and doing a lot of work around talent development, leadership development, and I'll get into that through some of the questions. But just want to say thank you and welcome to Charter. Hopefully that was
Great.
too
Thank
long.
you.
Perfect.
Next.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Camille Pyram. I'm currently a project manager for Associated Bank, but I spent the majority of my career as a talent development specialist, coaching, training, facilitating professional development and leadership training. Aside from that, I'm a part of SUI ATD, the Association for Talent Development, and I am their VP of programming. So if you ever attended one of our events, virtually or in person, that was me and some other folks on the committee that was in charge of that. A little bit about my career. I spent the majority of my career at BMO Harris Bank. I was there nearly 18 years when it was M&I. Do we remember M&I here? Yes. So I was a specialized trainer there in collections. So yeah, so I show people how to go and get the money. But from specialized training, I did transition over into project management and being a senior process analyst because I'm very task oriented. But I'm people focused as well. So I transitioned over to Associated Bank as a talent development supervisor because I love to see people grow within their careers. I want to take it outside of just specialized training. The pandemic happened and there were, a couple of changes. So I said, okay, I'll go back to my second love, project management. But I get a bird's eye view of what the organization is doing. So it's still people focused. So I'm very excited to be here today to share and answer some questions. And thank you so much for welcoming me here.
Thanks, Camille. Lauren.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jody Greenmeyer.
I'm sorry.
Not Lauren, but, and I am at Landmark Credit Union right now. So thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to learning from all of you as well. So really 7 years ago, I said, hey, you know what? I would love to move on from global manufacturing and look at a different industry, a different size of organization. So Fusion came to me and said, hey, there's this VP of HR position at Landmark Credit Union, which has been wonderful. And I'm looking at CJ because he's at Summit. So going to a not-for-profit organization, right? A not-for-profit organization that was smaller with a really robust growth strategy has been wonderful. I mean, credit union people are salt of the earth people. They're great. So the culture was already there. It was really trying to build out and, match our size from a growth perspective. I'm not sure we've done that yet. So I've evolved that role from just HR to training and development, right? And also internal communications, because when you're at a small company, for those of you who are at small companies, you kind of wear a lot of hats. So now I'm chief people officer, and we have our HR team and our training team and our internal comms team known as the people team. And we have a people first internal brand, but we're really focused on our culture and our people, those aspects, because it's very difficult to compete with, the big organizations of the world with deep pockets. But so we're trying to get very creative with development, how we talk to our associates from an internal comms perspective, engagement, those types of things. So looking forward to hearing how all of you are tackling that as well. But that's really the story of the last 7 years. I made that switch from, global manufacturing for your schedules, you're taking calls at 9 o'clock with China. So I kind of just wanted to take a step back and look at what else might be out there from an industry perspective, and it's been great.
So great. I think it's nice to have a variety of different perspectives on the
Yeah.
panel as well. And I will say, I'm Melissa Golter. I'm the managing partner at Focus Training. We have been building internal training and development programs for companies across North America, now going on our 30th year this year. So I've been involved for 25 years. I was a Badger at one point in my life, if there's any Badgers in the room, on Wisconsin. And I have always been passionate about people development as well. So Focus runs internal cohorts for leadership and management training, where people can send smaller groups of individuals through those institutes in a mixed cohort with perspective from different companies. We also build internal programs for a long-term relationship with Charter and many of the organizations represented in this room today. So thank you everyone for coming. I'll also say, a plug. I love the ATD plug because my partner was the former president of this organization. I'm very involved in Tempo Milwaukee, which is an organization for women in leadership, and honored to be helping with their leadership conference. We have Selma Blair coming to Milwaukee in now just a couple of weeks in October. So anybody that's passionate about developing their resource groups around women and women in leadership, happy to speak with you about that at some point during our time together as well. I think there's a common theme for all of these people up here, and one of those themes is people. You could hear each of them say something about the value of people, the priority of people. I believe from everyone's perspective today, we've never, ever valued talent the way we do today. It's like taking everything to a whole new height, from recruiting to developing to onboarding. We recognize, I think all of us, we're preaching to the choir in this room, but organization-wide respect for talent and talent development is at an all-time high since the pandemic. And so we're going to talk about some of those topics and some of those issues. And I love this idea, and Jody talked about it most recently, of culture. And how do we think about culture, and you being excited to be part of a culture that you feel enthusiastic about, and thinking about how do we inculcate people to the culture of an organization. So maybe you can start us off at the top, Jody, and just share, I like that you have different perspective from two different organizations, but maybe from what you have seen in other organizations and what you're experiencing now in your current role. How do you do that? How do you get people excited and engaged and connected to the culture?
Yeah, so like I said, coming to an organization like Landmark, there's already that people helping people culture, right? So it's a small organization. It's very, well, I say small, but it's 1,000 people now, 6 billion, but it's a very community-based organization. So some of that already exists in the pride of serving a member or a customer, right? And so it's kind of just utilizing that because it already exists, and then pulling it up and making sure people understand, like, hey, you've got this great culture here. Do you know that? So it really helps to have an internal communications organization and build that out as well. So we just went through a process of building out an internal brand, but then we will be able to do and use externally as an employment brand to the external world. And it's really people first. It starts with you, and there's a lot of components to that. But I think we had a good foundation, and I think that it made it much easier. As we looked at our training team when they were doing onboarding and orientation, it already existed. It was like, let's make this formal. So some of the things that people would say when they started in our organization, because we would ask, right, was, I felt so welcomed when I came in the door, and that made a lot of the difference. And we bring everyone right now, because we're in a geography we can, to the headquarters, and all of the messaging is kind of the same. So we really wanted to utilize that and build around that. So from a culture perspective, I think, that's kind of where we are today. From bringing new leaders in, we've seen a shift of let's create our onboarding plan around process. Like, how do you work at Landmark? How do you do this stuff? To how do you lead from a people first perspective, right? Instead, like, you can learn the nuts and bolts. You can, meet with people. We're a collaboration organization, but it's more, I think the shift now from a, talent perspective is you have to be building those relationships and that culture to then sell that and bring that in. this isn't any rocket science, right? This is just our focus. This isn't anything new to you all. This is just how we've been trying to refocus, because I think it really is going to come down to those margins, right? You can have, good compensation, have good benefits, you can have all of the basics, but where are you, playing along those little margins of how people feel when they come in the door. So that's kind of where we're at today. We hired a DEI director this year as well. So that inclusion and engagement and that feel is so important to our organization because it is diverse. So I think from a welcoming perspective and an onboarding perspective, getting that out right away. We're a community-based organization. So again, it already lives here. So it's just, working through and kind of telling people our message. So that's that. I hope that helps, but that's what we're doing. It'd be interesting to hear what you all are kind of experiencing.
Great perspective. And I think people will get to share in roundtables a bit about this topic of culture too. But Camille, I'd love for you to share in on this perspective. So how are you thinking about culture within the organization or other organizations of which you're connected to? What are some of the systems that you're using and how are you celebrating that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know most of us in this room, we've heard of customer experience, right? But right now we have a shift on the colleague experience. I mean, let's face it, you can't retain your colleagues or even fish for new colleagues if you don't take care of the colleagues that are in-house. So along those lines, I'll share with you my onboarding experience immediately. Just being taken out to lunches, knowing the who's who, having my person to be able to go to so I can navigate Associated Bank. It's a fairly large organization. Yeah, and our footprint is throughout the Midwest. So just knowing the who's who and someone reaching out to me, not only in my business line, but outside of the business line as well. Sometimes colleagues have shared they don't like to work in silos. We may hear that from our engagement surveys, right? Just making sure that there's that cohesiveness and they have a village in-house. When I transitioned over from HR into the project management space, I was hired during a pandemic. So that was very interesting. Yeah, that was very interesting. And I really like how Focus Training has the cohort learning because we do that in our project management space as well. So I like to call it a safe space for me and others who are new to make mistakes, if that makes sense. And so when I say a safe space, we have like a weekly meeting where it's just us PMs getting together. Okay, I had this issue come up. How did you all handle it? And we're like taking that 30 minutes to an hour, like figuring it out so we can go out back into our meetings or our projects and be great. And I really like how my line of business allows for new colleagues and even those who've been there for a while, the seasoned colleagues, to have that safe space. And we feel a part of the community. I mean, I'm 100% remote now. Many of us are, but knowing that we have that village or that person to help us integrate. And that's a little bit about our culture at Associated.
I think it's great that Camille's talking about that idea of how do we connect more broadly to the culture of an organization. And we have all different sizes of organizations represented virtually in the room here today. And I do think that concept of instead of just onboarding or developing your people in one business unit in a siloed fashion, as we sort of did back in the day, thinking about the value of the cross-functional experience. So encouraging everybody here today to think about as you're onboarding a department or a team, especially if you're in a larger organization, the value of either cohort experience, meaning you're pulling people from different organizations like the institutes with Focus, or even internally, if you're developing your own internal leadership development program or onboarding program, thinking about even simply what we're doing here today, mixing up different departments, different teams, and creating sort of that village or community that you're talking about, Camille. I think those are some great takeaways. I'll turn it to Angie now. Tell me a bit about how do you think about this in your world here at Charter? How do you bring people onto the culture, and what are strengths or opportunity areas, and how are you thinking of evolving that as an organization?
Yeah, I'll start kind of with our CEO, because I think one of the things that he really drives is the culture. He's been very intentional about what it means to be part of Charter Manufacturing. And he created, actually quite a few years ago, what we call the success formula. And our success formula is all about making sure that people know that our culture is really what drives engagement. Engagement drives productive employees reap the benefits of that by investing from a results perspective back into the business, which creates a positive culture. So we have a success formula that's seen on the wall when you walk out the door. And it's very intentional in making sure that people know what it's like to work at Charter. And then we have values, obviously, that also are an important part of that were really created a few years ago. I should say that more than a few years ago, pre-Angie, and were rolled out across the organization. And really trying to understand that those things are so important to Charter in terms of our culture and what we want to maintain and create. We do recognize that one of the things that we have to understand is the workplace and the workforce is changing. And so how do we make sure that we're shifting in the right way? Our culture is so core to what we do and the way that we think about relationship and community and how we interact with one another here at Charter, which is really important to us. But knowing that things are shifting, we have to adjust to those things. And so we're actually doing a lot of work right now on employee value proposition and what does that mean and how do we have to think about engagement in a way that might be different for different folks. And so really understanding the different people that work at Charter and what's really important to them and ensuring that we're providing the right experience for them in Charter manufacturing, as well as people that we want to bring into the organization may have different perspectives about what's important to them. So as we think about what I would consider what we call personas, right, which most of us are familiar with, how are we addressing those different personas and providing the right experience for them while still maintaining what's really important to Charter at its core, which is our success formula, our values. So as we think about bringing people into the organization, it's really getting them to understand the importance of that and how that plays out as we interact with each other. We have an orientation that we are looking at, I will be honest with you, to say what might we need to change, what might we need to alter, to really get people to understand that. Because as you know, based on the current situation, we're hiring a lot of new people into the organization. And some of those things through COVID kind of changed the method in which we went about that training, kind of shifted. And now we're in this place saying, what does that need to look like today? So we really are in this transition place of trying to understand what do we really want to make sure people know as they come into Charter? What's it need to feel like? What's it about being part of our organization and being part of our culture? And how do we express that in the onboarding process for people? So we have one right today, but I think what we're saying is it's probably not meeting the mark of this changing workforce and the things that we need to do. So we're going to be transitioning into something new and different. We haven't decided what that looks like yet, but I think it is really great for us to be thinking about it and trying to be a little more proactive in understanding what that workforce is going to expect from us and how we, again, keep the core culture at the heart of what we do, but be able to make the appropriate changes to be able to address the needs of our workforce.
So important, I think, this idea of constant change. We're all recognizing that and being able to pivot. I'm curious too, maybe you can start with this question, Camille, this idea of when you're bringing someone in new, and you've been through this experience fairly recently, what was good? So what worked well when you were being onboarded, or when you're thinking about this transition process for new people coming into an organization? Does anyone have examples of what some of the new and exciting that you're seeing that is working well?
Absolutely. So we had a pre-boarding process. So instead of waiting until the day a new hire starts, I heard from my leaders and I had meetings even before I started. So when it was my, hire day to onboard, I knew what was going on. I knew the who's who. I knew where to park if I needed to go somewhere. I had my equipment. So they prepared me ahead of time, which made it a really good experience. Meetings were optional, so I didn't feel obligated to have to join, or engage in, a project meeting before I was technically hired. But to know that I had that option was really, really comforting. Day one, a plan was laid out for me, which was huge because sometimes in your first day, you're overwhelmed, you're scared, you don't know what to do or who to go to, but right away, okay, you're going to meet with this onboarding coach and they're going to introduce you, that introduction again, introduce you to the who's who and who you need to run your project. They had a list of mentors, I like to call, lined up for me. So not only did I have my onboarding coach, I had a mentor to walk me through, each step along the way, which made it a great experience. I was comfortable to have that my person that I can go to outside of my direct manager, if that makes sense. Because our managers, we want to impress them, right? You know, but just to have that person, I love to call it my person that I can go to. It's not my manager that I can be transparent with. That made my onboarding experience amazing.
That's great. Well, in a similar kind of transition, when you're thinking about this at a macro level organizationally, how are you all thinking about this? What are some of the ways that you're getting innovative or thinking about this now hybrid, like we're experiencing today, work environment? We have some people physically there, some not. Are there techniques you're trying that are really working, Jenny?
Yeah, so who's not working on onboarding? I mean, I think everyone probably here is working on onboarding, or they just are fresh off of like a new onboarding program, right? So it's interesting in an organization that has a majority of our folks being hourly, right? And I think you may have some of that as well. So we're working on stratifying our onboarding process. So, you know, right now it's everyone every week together, which is cool. But at some point it's like, yeah, we need to focus on the new tellers, the call center people a little differently than maybe those exempt or leadership roles. So we're working on stratifying kind of different types of orientation. And then maybe with the exempt population, you don't have to do it every week, you know. So kind of working on what that looks like. We just built a new headquarters, but it feels like we don't even have enough space to do like 2 programs right now because of all the training and things we're doing. So it's interesting. But also using technology. So you talked about what can you send pre-hire, right? What you know, CEO message or your manager message, and people love video now, right? So it's like we're trying to tap into some different internal communication methods too. So how can you engage that associate right away before they even start? There's limitations, right? Especially with an hourly workforce. But then when they come on board, you know, what are those welcome messages? Is the system you use, because we're all using some kind of system, able to get them the information? Can they refer back to it? All of those types of things. So it's really all what we're working on right now, refining, adding our people first, you know, doing all of that just to get people at just a head start at kind of acclimating to the culture. We're also focusing on at the higher stage of making sure we're selecting folks that are a culture fit. So some of you might be working on that too, but making sure maybe we're asking the right questions or telling them a little bit more about Landmark's culture, because if they could opt out too, they could self-select out, like, hey, I'm not really, you know, excited about that culture. So we're trying to make better hiring decisions too. So I'd love to hear how you're doing that. But
really good point. I think to some of the Fusion folks in the room, this will be a good discussion point. So when you have ambassadors out there recruiting for your organization and trying to find the right people, how do you find the right fit? And what are some of the ways? And I love that concept of they have to align to the organization culture. It's a dual selection process, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we'll go to Angie. Anna, if you don't mind to go to the podium, we'll forward your slide and we'll take some questions from the audience at this time. So Anna can read those. Virtual participants, we have you with us in spirit. So if you have a question you'd like to ask to the panelists, we want to give you an opportunity via the chat to do that. But I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll look to some of those that Anna sees as she forwards and communicates with Betsy on our team. We'll start with you, Angie, on this one. And what I'm curious about is, when you think about people internally, so you're preparing leaders to take on different roles, perhaps they're moving to a different department. There was this idea once that you would start in an organization in finance and you'd work your way up, maybe someday you'd become CFO or in a primary financial position. In today's day and age, we see people more kind of working their way on a jungle gym and learning different parts of a business. How are you encouraging leaders to develop internally, and what are some of your systems at Charter to do that?
So in terms of the leadership development that we're doing here, we actually created a leadership development model a few years ago. And that was part of an HR strategy in terms of meeting the needs of the business. And through that model, what we identified was there's kind of foundational capabilities that everybody needs to have at regardless of what level you're at. So the model is not a leadership model just for leaders, it's a leadership model for everyone in the organization. We've stratified that out from leads others, leads self, leader of organization. So that applies to all levels within the organization. But what we did was we differentiated some skills that we said, these are the really things that drive us forward as an organization. This differentiates charter. So there's 7 attributes, but of the 7, there's 3 that we say, these are the keys, right, to the kingdom in terms of what we need to focus on. These are kind of not entry level, but these are kind of the foundational pieces. And here are the things that are going to really take us to the next level. We did 360s across our entire leadership team. And from that, we looked at gaps. We didn't look at individual, but we looked at composite data. And we developed a program to address those gaps with our leaders. And we sent them through 6 days of a leadership development training program. And it was really just to create that expectation of, here's how we want our leaders to operate in the business. Here are the expectations. Here's the common language we want you to use. Here's the models we want you to think about as you interact. And so from a development standpoint, we're really trying to drive consistency across that level of leadership. And part of that program was really to get them to understand how to coach and understand the needs of their employees, right? And so as you think about wanting to move across the organization or develop myself in a different role, you need a leader that's going to help have that conversation with you. And so part of that was really to help them understand how you get to know your employee, how do you get to know what their needs and wants are, and then what are the things that you can do to help coach and mentor them to get there. Along with that, I'll just kind of sidestep a second, because we also developed the talent review process. We named it Talent Builder because we really wanted to focus on not looking backwards, but looking forwards, and that we're building talent. And we moved away from the traditional way of looking at some of those skills and where people were going to sit in the organization, and we call them development paths. And so now we assess folks and we put them in a path, and that path is really about where do you want to go next or not at all. And so are you just stay and be great, which is one of our paths, or are you ready to move, or do you want to stretch and grow? And so really kind of taking the secrecy out of some of those things and being transparent, but then also being able to talk to your employees openly about what is it that you want, and then what are the right development things that we need to help you get there. Say be great doesn't mean that I don't move out of my role and that I don't have to develop. It's no, you still need to develop and be great at what you do. And so what does that look like? And so making sure that people get the right development. Now we're moving through that process for the first year this year. Our second year will start in January. And so it's been really, the organization has really liked it a lot. And we've focused it mostly on our salary workforce for now. But that's been a way that we've been trying to develop leaders and give them the tools that they need to help grow and develop the talent that they have in their care.
Really good examples. And I like that you addressed the secrecy variable, because I think there was a period of time where everyone had a secret 9 box and you wonder where you were, or you didn't even know the 9 box. And there's a lot of different ways to assess talent. But I do believe that it is important for today's workforce to have openness and transparency and clarity about their path and the options for their path. And also I like that Angie addressed the option to be really happy where they are in their role is a part of this equation. I think, Camille, you're a great living example of this right now, someone who has had different roles and experiences. What has worked well in your talent development path internally in an organization or externally in transitioning?
Absolutely. Just being able to have the opportunity to spread my wings, if you will. And I'll give you an example. So we have resource groups, or some organizations call them affinity groups. Just being able to have the allotted time and flexibility to onboard and sharpen my skills in our resource groups. So right now, another plug. So right now I chair our community involvement and market visibility for cultural awareness at Associated Bank. And that is helping me sharpen my skills in, budgeting, how can I, market better, events and other networking, et cetera. I really like how that role is supported, and it gives me visibility within the organization. So even though, and this is, my mantra, your career journey is driven by you, but supported by your leader. And I own that mantra, and Associated Bank does a really nice job of supporting me in whatever venture I want to go. I expressed, hey, I want to learn more about this competency. And my leader said, okay, well, we'll put you here with this group of folks so you can learn more, et cetera. So really that support from the top down, helped me grow within my career journey where I'm at now.
So important. And I think it's great that you brought up this concept of resource groups. So this might not be a new language for any of us here, but maybe it is for some folks. But many organizations today, big and small in size, from thousands of employees to 100 employees, have what are called affinity groups or employee resource groups. They could be ERGs or ARGs. But I do think that regardless of what the title is and how an organization defines those groups, making sure that they exist.
Yeah.
And I really like that Camille talked about making sure that you're utilizing that amazing internal resource of knowledge. So a great example of this is we run a conference every year in November. This year will be November 17th called Epicenter. And at last year's Epicenter conference, we brought all these DEI folks together to share ideas and best practices. We'll certainly send everyone here an invitation to that event. So if you're new to this and you're thinking our company needs to do this, to get ideas from other organizations really specifically for how they're focusing resource groups. There was someone from Kohl's that talked about how now at Kohl's Corporation, they're going to all the resource groups with the C-suite team and talking about strategy. And there was some talk already in the room of having someone in a primary C-suite leadership position around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So just for all of us to be thinking about how are we being intentional about this DEI effort, and then are we using those resource groups to drive the business strategy? That should be a really linked relationship. The largest resource group at Kohl's is the LGBTQ resource group. They now go to that group to help them define product decisions, business strategy, and it has had a significant impact on a certain sector of their business. So making sure that your employees mirror the people that you serve and that you're thinking about the opportunity for leadership development as you've had, Camille, through the resource group, it's going to come back to the person in their job too. So I love that you brought up that resource group perspective. I will allow some closing comments on this topic, and then we'll bounce to you, Anna, if the audience has a question. So thinking about this internal evolution, if you're taking employees within the organization, preparing them for a new or different role, what are some specific things that you all are doing that are unique or memorable?
I kind of want to go back to that previous
Yes,
conversation.
no, I like that. If you have thoughts on the DEI perspective, I'd love you to share that too.
I think it ties in because
Great.
we're building, we'll be launching a new leadership development kind of structure, right, next year. And so it was really with this all ties together, you all know this, with diversity in mind. So in the financial institution industry, right, it's very difficult, for leaders to find diverse talent. So it's a very white male dominated industry. So we pulled some levers and some recent hires that were our success stories. But from a development perspective, we recognize that we need to build up our it's the build versus buy. But we need to build up our talent so that we can have and promote diverse leadership, because we're not going to get them necessarily from the outside, right? So we built our leadership development structure with that in mind. So it starts with an emerging leader category where we're going to specifically reach out to the diverse employees in our organization, right? This is a really good way for us to do that and bring them into that structure and that learning plan before they're people managers, right? I'll probably do that. But it is stratified at all different levels so that even if we're bringing in someone at a manager level, then they've got their formal leadership development plan with some formal training options when they come in. But it is built with that in mind. And I love that we're going to go out and make this what we do now, not just, let me just think about it in the back of my mind, but no, we're going to be kind of mandating that, right? So that's what I was, is that a differentiator? No, I don't think so. I think you all kind of maybe do that, maybe not officially, or you probably do it more unofficially. But I think it is going to set us apart from having to go externally and struggle, because we struggle getting diversity in some of those top leadership roles. So
Great point. Yeah, and
it's unique, but
I think this, not everyone is doing this. So I think it is a really good takeaway for all of us is this intentionality. And I like that you talked about even the idea of sort of metrics, like how are we quantifying this
Exactly.
and being really intentional behind our efforts for internal development through a DEI lens, which is great. Anna, I'm going to give you the microphone and pass it virtually to our folks. And if you have someone that you want to unmute or if you want to share out a comment or a question to our panelists from our virtual participants, we'll take a couple of those as well.
Muted. Amy, if you want to share your question, or I can read it out loud.
And Amy, if you want to just introduce yourself and your company, you can, Anna. Amy, if you want to just introduce yourself and your company when you go off mute, that would be great.
Am I the Amy we're talking about?
Great.
Because I put a bunch of things in the comments.
For Amy Rowell, I already see your face. So Amy, share where you work and what your question is to the group.
Well, now I have to go back and see exactly which question they might be talking about because I put a lot of things in here. Okay, so I had a couple of comments about sometimes being uncomfortable when we say that we're training and developing people on what to say, that we're too often centering the conversation on white norms. So I'm curious to know how organizations are considering true diversity efforts so that BIPOC staff can still be who they are. And I also had questions and comments about, I look for culture add, not culture fit. So sort of related to that. And then also wondering how resource groups are embraced outside of their spaces into the overall organization so that outside of those groups, others in the agency can learn about what the barriers and issues are that exist that even made the resource groups necessary.
So
It's a summary of the comments that I've been putting in.
But we'll let everybody
There's
type
a lot.
on that, Amy. And I love that Amy always has such great ideas all around. So if you don't mind to mute again, Amy, there's a few topics that she's given us to chew on there. So you can sort of choose your own adventure in that answer. But good things, I think. So one is, how are we thinking about the connection of our resource groups and that effort? Two is, what was the first question?
The lens of how you're training to not, I think Amy, you said the white norms, right?
To not white center.
That's
I'd love to just jump in there because
Great.
we don't have that kind of, I haven't even really thought that through fully internally facing, but where we see it, and I'd love to hear from you all, is that we're adjusting our kind of sales and service training to our internal folks to keep in mind that when they're sitting down, let's say they're still sitting down or having a virtual conversation, whatever, face to face with a member, that they're thinking through, this may be a member that isn't from a traditional family, right? Or because their financial needs might be different if they're coming from an LGBTQ relationship or a different part of the community, et cetera. So we're looking at how do we train to have those more appropriate conversations. So that's interesting, I think, but it's so needed. Like, if you're not training your associates that are front line to your members, what are they saying? So that was one thing that I thought of, but internally from a leadership development perspective, that is a very good point. So Amy, you should be on the panel next time.
She's invited to the next one.
Yeah.
Angie, to either of Amy's questions or any of those, sort of what was lighting up for you that Amy was asking and talking about?
Yeah, for me, some of the programming that we've been doing on the leadership development side is, we've touched on it, and I would say it's not as robust as I would like it to be at this point, but we'll get there, is around unconscious bias and how are we making sure that people are becoming much more aware of understanding what that means to them and how that comes into conversations or how that comes into mentoring relationships and how that manifests itself in the work that you do. And so really trying to get people to understand that through some of the learning and development programs that we're putting out there. I mean, we know that that's something that we have to address because it's not necessarily common in the training that we do today, but we're touching on it. And so it needs to be in a bigger way as we think about the work next year. We're moving our programming down through the manager ranks and into our frontline leader programs. And so we're very aware that those are the things that we're going to have to focus on to ensure that we are driving the right types of conversations and the right types of interactions and appreciating where people are coming from and their backgrounds.
And such a good point that, unconscious bias is just that, it's unconscious. So how do we make it more conscious for organizations? Are we training people around the topic and teaching about the topic and why it's so important? Really good points. I'll let Camille share now your perspective on some of Angie's thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll touch on the resource group. So I think we do a really nice job of having a resource group for everyone. So you have a sense of belonging, whether you're a veteran, whether you're in LGBTQ plus community, you have a women's affinity group, etc. So everyone has somewhere they can go to with other colleagues who have a shared experience. But what we don't want to do is have those CRG groups be working in silos, because that can really easily happen. So I know we've been intentional about collaboration. Okay, I know the Women's Network is doing this over here. We have the same vision. Let's collaborate so we can represent that unity that we talk about a lot, as well as roll up through our mission and vision of the organization.
Great points. And I've heard too, most recently, a lot of organizations having a C-suite sponsor for all of their affinity groups that is not of that affinity group. So perhaps my white male colleague is part of a group that he's sponsoring that has nothing to do with his origin or affinity, to create some more kind of broad-based perspective and bring that knowledge if you don't have a DEI leadership person in your C-suite like some organizations do. Really good takeaways from our virtual folks. And I do want to give everyone in the room a time to talk, and also for you all remotely a chance to meet one another, because the relationships we're going to build in here today are equally as important. So right now we have 1:15 on our clock. We're going to take 14 minutes in a breakout. So Betsy will be coordinating all of our virtual people in breakout. We are conveniently in breakouts here. The women on our panel will join teams. And again, if you have more than one person from the same organization at a table, just wheel your chair around to a new table and find a spot to get some new perspective. We have 2 questions that we're going to pose here for discussion. At the top, I would encourage you either virtually or in person just to go around and introduce yourselves, share your name, your role, and your organization. And then look to these 2 questions and share some perspective with people on your team. So question 1 is, does your organization have a formal leader onboarding process? What does it look like, and how do you plan to evolve it? Angie was really honest and transparent in saying we can do better. And I think we all want to walk away from this room with 1 or 2 ideas of how we can do better. So what are you doing, and how can we take it to the next level? And then question 2, what is a success to highlight from your organization relating to finding and onboarding talent? So is it a relationship that you have? Is it an experiment that you tried that worked? Is it a new system that you're putting in place? What are you doing that works really well? We've heard some great examples already today about this time, but let's dig deeper into that topic as well. So we'll take 14 minutes. If you wouldn't mind, just to choose either virtually or in person, 1 person to serve as your team's scribe and just jot down a few bullet pointed notes. We actually will go around and hear some feedback from all the groups. But while we pause at this moment, let's give our speakers an in-person or virtual round of applause. We will come migrate into teams there, and we will send you to teams in Zoom land as well. We'll see you back here in 14 minutes.
I can't believe how our time goes by. I know we always want more time than we have. The good news is that we can stay after for more discussions. We certainly can have discussions even after we wrap this session together. But we want to give people a chance to share out some of their high-level findings, so that we're not just hearing from our own team and our own table, but also some from other folks out there in the room. So we're going to go to virtual teams first. And Betsy, I'll allow you to call out if one of the virtual teams wouldn't mind to have one of their scribes share out. We will listen and hear to some of the perspective of what one of the virtual teams came up with as far as what they're thinking about when it comes to this. So we'll go virtual first, and then we'll bounce to in-room as well. Betsy?
Okay, that's great. Matt, do you want to share out what your team talked about?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we talked about a wide-ranging set of things, but most recently, I think something we were all really interested in. One of the members of our group operates a nonprofit that serves a very specific population, and they are focused on also recruiting talent from that population. And so we talked about this. What struck me was that it's a great way to help protect your culture as you're bringing leaders in from outside the organization. I think some of us worry that as new people come into the organization, while we're onboarding people into our culture also shifts as new people are added, as Amy said, right? They're a culture add. And this organization is serving a population and then also recruiting those same folks into the talent pipeline. So they're already aligned with some of those core values and the core work that the nonprofit is doing. So as they grow, they have got additional confidence that they're getting the right people in the door who believe in what they're doing and see the value of it.
Great takeaways. And I do like that in discussion here today, we've talked about knowing our culture, understanding our culture, bringing people into the organizations that fit our culture, but also having some culture disruption and having some intentionality about bringing new perspectives into our organizations. Maybe some of you talked about that at your tables. I know there was some discussion as I was milling around the room about how to do that. Let's move to in-room, and one of the teams in here to share out, if you wouldn't mind to share your name and the organization that you represent, or a couple of the people from your table whose ideas you're sharing represent. Who would like to share out first? Any volunteers? I'll go to this group in the back where Christina and Angie are sitting. Who is your team scribe, and what are a couple of high-level things your team came up with? And if you wouldn't mind to come to the front, it might help for our virtual folks if you come up to the front so they can hear your ideas. Christina, do you want to bring some of those up to the front of the room? It'll just help if you're closer to the mic. Great.
We didn't really have much of a scribe. We had a really, really interesting conversation, I think, where so I think where our conversation really took us was around where we found opportunities. There's a lot of growth happening within different organizations, or maybe there's different elements of it. There's been, two entities of a company, or you have different locations, and trying to find some facility. And does the direction, does the conversation or communication come from corporate, and you trickle that down into the other locations? At what point do the local leaders have some responsibility in bringing on their new employees as well, whether it's a new leader or it's another individual in the organization? So I think there were some good ideas shared around, do you have assigned partners? Are you scheduling conversations with the right individuals at leadership levels? And I loved Angie called out one specific thing that they do at the leadership level is providing even a guide with some topics or questions as other leaders are meeting with new representatives. So what do you want to learn about them? Why are you meeting with them? I thought that was a really interesting takeaway. And just something where it's a growth opportunity. I think we all agreed across the table. We have some work to be done there. So
that's good. And I think that's honest today, that we're all trying to get ideas to sort of take things to the next level. Good ideas from your team all around. I will allow virtual folks, if you have ideas, please share them in the chat. Would love to have each virtual team's ideas represented here today. And Anna can be your voice in the room, or we can call out to you. Maeve, do you want to represent for your team and your group some key ideas that came out of your group's discussion? And maybe Maeve, share with everyone where you're working now and what your organization is as well.
Sure. I'll come and stand next to the expert and try and follow in your awesome shoes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maeve McGuire. I'm from Korn Ferry. People at my table we had Financials, Summit, and Landmark, and then Amanda from Focus. So we had a variety of different organizations and how we onboard. But one thing we really talked about is, how do you not only just attract in this day to day, right, with, the hybrid working, the remote working versus being on site, but then how do you take that and onboard as well, right? I mean, it used to be just like, we have this one way, this is how we do it. And now it's like, okay, we may have different people who don't want to be onboarded in person or don't want to come into the office, and some who do and need that. So it makes our jobs even that much more challenging, is to figure out how do we meet all of these needs, right? Because it's no longer one way for everybody, because that doesn't work in our way today. So that's a big challenge. And then we also threw into the mix mergers and acquisitions, right? So in banking and so forth, you have a lot of those. So not only are you trying to onboard new leaders, new hires, how do you integrate those new leaders into your organization when maybe things aren't even all that formal or put together, foundationally, that brings in yet another challenge for our organization. So yeah, we were talking about a lot of challenges.
Good, and I think that's so true in the M&A space, which we see a lot of today in consolidation of some industry. How does that impact the feelings? There was a lot of talk about this has to do with feelings. How do people feel in organizations? What's their comfort level? What's going to happen in a time of transition? How do you navigate change and ambiguity for your people? Definitely a really important topic. And I was sitting with this team as well. A lot of themes of it's not one size fits all. We have to change the way we're doing things. So how are we going to do that and solutioning together? So good ideas. Thank you. From all of our people showing, let's give them a round of applause. And I'll bounce back over to Anna. Are there things you're seeing in the chat that you think people would like to share out with the group as well from our virtual participants?
I'm not seeing anything.
Okay, that's good. Well, virtual folks, please feel free. Yes.
Jessica just said I'd be happy to share.
Okay, Jessica, we'll have you unmute and share a couple of ideas, high level from your team. And if you don't mind, Jessica, to share out with us your name and the organization that you represent as well.
Sure thing. Again, Jessica Newton, and I'm actually the founder of my business, Parallel Coaching and Design. I do personal development coaching to individuals one-on-one and organizational design consulting for businesses and teams. And one of the things that I think is, we're talking a lot about meeting people where they are. Even if you don't have a DEI strategy per se, a lot of this talk is about equity and making sure that we're understanding how to support people's unique needs as far as how they can do their best, how they can perform at their best. And I think one of the best things that can be done in the onboarding process, and I talked about this a little bit in our group, is just being able to have regular ongoing touch points at the beginning of that person's tenure and asking them, how does the culture measure up? We had a lot of conversations about culture during the recruitment process. So being able to get feelers and a temperature check on that in a regular way, I think not only builds the rapport and shows your good faith and goodwill to that new staff person, but it also enables you to have this quality check overall so that you have a general ongoing understanding of how this culture is shaping up the culture that you're trying to develop. And it's not something that you're doing, once a year at the end of the year just to get some data on the table and report out to whomever, but to just integrate them into the ongoing feedback loop of, how is it here and what are some things that we can improve upon? And I think that's such a huge value asset when you're asking new people, because you're getting those fresh eyes, that fresh perspective right as they're entering, and you're setting the tone that you value that open dialogue, and that this is what's happening in the beginning, and this is going to keep going as long as you're with us. We're always going to be asking for your input and making sure that we're responsive to that.
That's so important and so valuable, and it's a very easy miss to forget to remind our leaders to ask people, how are you feeling? What do you need? What's the amount of frequency of communication that you want? Do you want an annual performance review, or do you want to check in weekly or monthly? So reminding our leaders throughout our organizations to do that and to ask those questions and pulse check. I love that you brought that up, is so important. Let's go to this team up front and hear some ideas in person. Anyone from this group who wants to share out? Jesse, if you were the scribe, that would be great. Sure. And if you want to introduce yourself and your organization, yeah, come on up, Jesse. That's great.
Okay.
I'll turn this around.
Jessie Mayer, Hydrate Chemical. So we had a group from, it's MasTech, right?
Yes.
Okay, MasTech and here at Charter, and then Fusion. So I really like, Jan opened up with an onboarding technique or success really that started even before the offer. So, and I think we all know it starts in the interview process, but you called it a concierge service, and I just love the branding of that, where you are actually kind of coaching not only the interview process, but then you're coaching and you're providing them kind of some nuggets as they're getting introduced to Charter before day one. And then connecting them with mentors and kind of lunches throughout, even if there's not a formal program, you could still have a way to connect to that. We talked a little bit about what, we might call like a new manager assimilation. So that's for someone who is either new to, for example, and we're rolling this out at Hydrate, new to Hydrate, or new to a leadership role. And this is more of the kind of the nitty gritty details of how to give a performance review, how to set goals with your team, cadence and expectations, and then shifting over to more of a soft skills training, which would be what we call leadership development program. It's very generic, but this is giving them, you know, the coaching. And I think Clint, you talked about this as well, giving them kind of the day-to-days of how to set expectations. And you can build that out into different modules so that especially if you're looking to scale it, when you have volume recruiting and new hires, you're able to have people pop in and out. I really like the idea that you mentioned on checkpoints with new leaders of kind of 30, 60, 90. So I know for us, for example, we do that with our new hires. We don't necessarily have a formal program to check in with our leaders, so especially our new leaders. So I think that was really great, and just aligning them to HR business partners, right? And I think all of us in HR, we are resources and we're there, but do we have like a formal cadence on some of that? And then just kind of talking a little bit about frontline leadership at the end of our conversation. And that's always kind of the most challenging and quite frankly, probably where most of our volume is, at least those of us that are in, you know, manufacturing or those that are highly hourly work-based. You know, making sure that we're really investing in our frontline leaders, both financially, but also from a development side of things, because they're going to grow our future pipeline. So thanks.
Thanks, job, team. Yes, give a round of applause and to our virtual team as well. And I will say to virtual folks, please feel free to type concepts in the chat if you were your team's nominated scribe, or if you don't know who your scribe was, you can volunteer to be the scribe and just jot some ideas in the chat, because one of the benefits of the virtual environment is that you can hear what's happening live and you can also read what's happening virtually. So for those of us crazy multitaskers in the world, sometimes we love that additional feedback. So feel free to share those thoughts. To any team in the room that didn't get to share, please know that in closing, we'll have time to talk with other folks and to kind of share out some of those ideas and best practices. I'm just curious, by a show of hands, how many people virtually or in person, you can raise your virtual hand or your real hand, got at least one new idea today that you can bring back to your organization? Awesome. Yeah, I see all the hands raised here, a lot of hands raised virtually, and that's really the goal and the mission of this experience, is to bring people together in community to really share what we're doing and to talk about ideas, talk about best practices, talk about challenges and things we're trying to solution around, and be one group in doing that. So these sessions will continue, as Amanda said, we'll be back together in February, but the genesis of this actually came from Jessie, who's in the room at Hydrite. She knew that the two organizations, Focus Training and Fusion, should meet, and it's been a really nice partnership. So at the helm of the team at Fusion is John. Let's give him a round of applause. He's going to share a few
Morning, everybody. I'm so fortunate and so happy that you all made it. I'm so fortunate to know so many of you in person and online. Quick show of hands, how many of you remember the old, really inspirational posters that said, "Team together, everyone achieves more"? Like every HR department's had one of those inspirational posters, right? So going back to Melissa's thoughts, the collective brainstorming within the room and online, together we can all achieve more, right? I think that we all get so siloed, we all work so hard, so fast, and going in one direction. These types of quarterly get-togethers where we can actually learn from one another, take best practices back to our organizations, share within our networks. So as a part of that, everybody online, in person, network, right? Connect with one another to keep that ongoing networking, best practice sharing going. Charter, thank you so much, Angie, Jan, for hosting. We truly appreciate it. Jody, Camille, Angie, thank you for being on the panel. And Melissa, Amanda, Anna, thank you guys for coordinating. Looking really forward to everybody connecting, networking, and sharing best practices for hopefully sessions to come.
I know that soon we're going to thank Angie in a special way. Amanda has something for her on behalf of both of our teams, but I would just say two things. I noticed a lot of people taking notes when I was talking about Epicenter. So we will send out on behalf of the Focus team, that's a conference focused on DE&I initiatives. So if you have people that lead your resource groups, if you're interested in just learning, we don't even do this at our organization, but I know we need a broader focus on DE&I with intentionality. You're welcome to join us on November 17th. That's also a complimentary event. If you have people in your organizations that are passionate about development, there's a lot of people in the room who are graduates. Any graduates or focused experience people, they're all around the room here. You can talk to some of those, but certainly we'll welcome you to learn more about our institutes. We build internal leadership development cohorts in partnership with companies after we've done an org 360 and really have our training team inculcate into that culture and become ambassadors of those organizations. But sometimes there's benefit to breathe air outside of your own organization's scuba system. And if you think that's important for your people, we also do mixed cohort leadership development experiences. So Accelerate is for new up and coming leaders, strong, high performing individual contributors who you're developing into mentorship roles. And then the Elevate Institute is for more strategic level leaders in your organization. If you're looking to develop your VPs or some of your senior leadership, that would be a good fit for folks that are managing a broader team of people that maybe haven't done that historically or have, but want to sharpen their skills. So Betsy from our team will follow up with more information, but certainly wanted to share with you a way to get more details about focused training. And I'm going to have Amanda come back up and close to say a special thanks to our sponsor company. Let's give her a round of applause. Amanda.
Again, everyone, and we just wanted to give a little gift to our host, ENG. So flyers, make her day brighter. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you have a great rest of your day. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Feel free to stay and talk and mingle. Virtual folks, you can talk in virtual Zoom land as well. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.